Hi, my name is Matt Scherer. I am the founder of the League of Exceptional Storytellers. It's an offshoot of a program that started over a year ago when my communications mentor, Tom Singer, created a weekly mastermind. And he decided at the end of December, he was ready to move on to other things. And I said, no, Tom, this is a great forum. Let's do some more of this. Let's have some more communications. Let's do this. And I got to thinking about this, that I don't want to do this on a weekly basis. So I'm going to start kind of slow and do it on a monthly basis. What I would like to do, since we have such a small group here, I'd like everybody just to give me a 30-second introduction. And if you're over the 30 seconds, I'm going to come back up with the little red sign that says you've gone too long. So Scott, I'm going to start with you. If you'll just do a short 30-second intro of who you are.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. And it is just now afternoon. My name is Scott Carley. I'm the Change Energizer. I'm a keynote speaker, and I energize stalled leaders to focus and innovate and take action on their vision, their goals, and their key performance indicators. I do that all over the country, and I do it virtually, just like I'm doing it right now, until we can get back on stage.
Okay, Dan, you're next. Hey, Jim. Let me send you the link via LinkedIn, okay? Yes, sir. All right, bye. Okay.
As with all good projects, stuff happens, right?
Yeah.
So I'm Dan Collins, and I have plenty of sea stories, and I was fascinated by the title of this LinkedIn Live, or whatever we're calling this.
We're calling this the League of Extraordinary Storytellers.
Well, I've got plenty of stories.
I've heard some of your stories too, and they are some good stories.
They get better with age.
They do, yeah, especially for one or two scotches. Dan Sommer, you are next, sir. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, Dan Sommer. I'm in military transition. I'm an Army lawyer. I leave the military at the end of this month and still in this transition process, and I've profited extraordinarily from Matt and some of his friends, Don Gleason and many others. The title hooked me too. I have no idea what this is, but I couldn't turn it down.
So let me ask you a quick, ask you for a quick plug to Jim? Dan, can you tell people about the Military Transition Roundtable?
I've known Matt and Don for over a year, and they asked me to join one of their, I believe, initial mastermind groups that's associated with their nonprofit Military Transition Roundtable. And it's a I like to think a curated group of people who are leaving the military who want to make the most of their next chapter and their significant accomplishments in the military to continue that transition with the greatest momentum possible, and to do something meaningful in the next part of their professional life. And they've helped me do that, think through that.
And we had one other person, and she dropped off. If she comes back.
David, you haven't introduced David yet.
I'm waiting to, David's our speaker.
Oh, wow.
David Smith agreed to be my speaker for the first topic, and our topic is going to be the virtual meeting. So David, I turn this over to you, and you've got 20 minutes to tell people where you see the future of virtual meetings. Are we in a world full of Zoom? What's going to happen next?
Well, to me, it's very interesting. And Scott is one who's out every week beginning to practice this. And I love that. Part of my background, I'm a very diverse background. I've been an assistant dean at the University of Texas at Austin. I've been involved with consortia, the MCC consortia, the CIMATEC consortia. I've started a couple of companies. I've been in other ones, doing a lot of different things. I've done work both in academia, the commercial sector, the military and the intelligence community. Some of my noteworthy projects I can talk about is I was the principal architect and designer of InQtel for the Central Intelligence Agency. I ran the Futures program up at Fort Meade, Maryland at NSA. Done a lot of something called a wicked problem roadmap, which is a problem that there's no known solution path, where we've involved hundreds of people in putting together usually long range 25, 35 year roadmaps in really hard areas such as high energy density storage, the future of different types of surveillance systems and other things like that. And I was really fortunate to do some of the very first roadmaps and some technology back in the early 90s, like quantum computing and biological computing. But because of some of that diversity, I've gotten to speak at many, many different conferences of different types, both public conferences, non-public conferences. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I did a conference on cybersecurity with a little bit over 4,000 people on it, which I'm glad it was virtual, because staying in front of 4,000 people probably would have gotten to my head a little bit. But you begin to see all these types of changes going on. Oh, one other thing. One of the guys in my office in Dallas, I'm in both Dallas and Austin, and went through my CI Vita, and he informed me that I've done over 700 speeches in my career. And that number kind of blew me away. But I understand that a lot of an in-person talk, and Scott, who's online with us, is a perfect example of this. It's really about storytelling.
We also have another exceptional speaker by the name of Jim Comer here. Hi, Jim.
Oh, I see Jim.
So,
and so those are some of the backgrounds here. I thought about putting a deck together, but with it being such a group of speakers and it being Matt's first one, I decided more to talk online more with you and try to touch some of the elements in conferences that I think are going to be really important going forward. One of the things that I had pulled some surveys in the past, and there was a recent questionnaire that went out about why are conferences in 2021 being canceled? And, you know, COVID is a big part of it. But as you look how COVID has impacted it and everything else, the three key reasons kind of struck me is the large crowd size. And that caused me to dig deeper. The second one, though, that was really interesting is even with the conferences where they're beginning to come back to in-person conferences, there's much, much, much lower attendance rates. And if you go and talk to the meeting planners and others, they're seeing that there's tremendously smaller budgets for conferences too. There was one of the surveys done that said that 57% of the event planners believe their budgets will be reduced by 60 or more %. And, you know, if you begin to look at someone who speaks professionally, like Scott, those numbers are scary. But even then, as you begin to look at some of the other numbers, there's some very interesting statistics on that. And it's when one of the surveys done recently was looking at when do you think people will return to large conferences? And a lot of the different surveys I've seen in that have said they do not believe large conferences will come back really into 2022 or 2023. They'll begin, about a third of them thought you'll begin to see conferences coming back towards the last half of 2021. But the vast majority believe you're not going to see it after that.
Hey, David, can I stop you for a second?
Sure.
I got a couple questions because I'll forget this. First question is, I understand about the drop in numbers. You said smaller groups. Will we see smaller groups that are more interactive in nature, where it's could be a conference for some people, but it's also an opportunity for people to dial in from other parts of the world?
Well, you're beginning to go where I was going to head.
Sorry about that.
And you're 100% right. And we're seeing new technologies, new software and things to come out to begin to support this type of interaction. One of the surveys I was talking about said that small conferences of under 100 people are the ones most likely to come back as a hybrid of people meeting on location and people meeting virtually. And it's the small conferences of under 100 where you're going to see things like what we're doing today, where Zoom is more part of that process. But you're going to see, particularly as you go to groups larger than 100, you're going to see different technologies begin to come into play and different ways to do things. You know, if you had gone to conferences like South by Southwest and others like that in the last couple of years, many of them were beginning to use augmented technology to help with questions, like SLIDO, which is one of the tools that South by used and some other conferences use. There's multiple other ones where you can ask the question through the web, and they're consolidated and then they're presented to the speaker that way. When conferences do come back, though, in live sessions, you're going to see some of the technologies that we traditionally used in the past totally being abandoned. Like, remember the handheld microphone? Go up to the microphone in the aisle. You're not going to see that anymore, because those are part of the things that where there have been some live conferences up to today, some of those have been credited with becoming part of the spreading of the virus. And particularly in Europe, of the conferences that have gone back and tried in-person conferences, the latter part of 2020, 70% of those have been characterized as a super spreader event.
So I got a question, another question, sorry.
Go ahead.
Okay, didn't mean to blow your flow. You guys much, so we're doing away with handheld mics?
You're going to do away with handheld mics in the audience.
And so what's the solution? What's the technology that?
You're going to see things like what I was talking about with a Slido, which, and there's other ones coming out, which will let you from your smartphone ask questions, make comments.
Oh.
Also, you're seeing new technologies come in place to help virtual events happen. I mean, we've all have used Zoom a lot as one, but there's three other ones that I'm seeing begin to go even more and more. And this is Event Cloud, Attentify, and SOCIO. What these are is not just the video conferencing part, but it does registration, it does networking, it does chat. It has engagement tools in there for the people in the audience too. And what's neat about those is it's beginning to use technology to change conferences into a different experience when you have to be virtual.
Hey,
so,
David,
go ahead, Scott.
Could I interject something?
Shoot.
I did a half-day retreat for a group of CEOs up in Ohio on Thursday, and it was all on Zoom. But he had a thing called an OWL camera.
All right.
And that OWL camera does a 360 panoramic, so you get to see the whole room. But then it also has a mic, and the mic is 360 as well. And so when somebody starts speaking to ask a question, the camera automatically goes to that person and the mic directs to that person, but there's no feedback from all the rest of the people talking because it's just one mic, directional mic on that OWL camera. And that really was successful.
And the OWL camera works really well for small groups.
Yeah, it was a group of about 15, and there were, I think, 12 in the room, and then 3 or 4 of us that were virtual. So it was great technology.
Yeah. So what you're seeing coming out is a bunch of the 360 cameras. You're seeing new versions of front of the room cameras that have multiple lenses in it and multiple microphones to do it. You're also seeing a lot of new companies, Sennheisers and others, trying to perfect hang from the ceiling microphones and others like that, to where you also get the proximity effect into. So the OWL is one that was one of the early ones out. Logitech has one that's in beta right now that's like the OWL and others, but they're designed more for groups of 25 people or less, 30 people or less. And you're going to see more of that. Where you run into challenges is when you see groups which are larger than that. So, for example, here in Austin, one of the groups coming back both virtually and in person is the Austin Forum on Technology. And they've always streamed their meetings. They had a pass around, pitch it to you microphone that also the camera would automatically fall where that microphone transmitter is. But you're even seeing that going away because it has that physical touch. So you're going to see technology come into place that is trying to begin to take the physical touch out. But when we go to conferences, at least I do, I want to go to the sessions, but the networking, the asking questions of people around me in the room, the talking to the speaker, the going out and getting drinks and going deeper into it. That's one of the parts that's going to be hard to replicate. And some of these other technologies, such as the SoCo, the Event Cloud, and Attendify, are beginning to look at how to do that too. So one of the conferences I participated in a few months ago used SoCo. And what was real interesting to me about it is, yes, it had all the registration stuff built into it, just like when you register for a physical conference. And it had the main speaking events. It also had rooms where you could set up, and if it's a conference where in the past there would be multiple speakers speaking in different rooms, it had that as well. But then one of the things that really fascinated me with part of it is it had a virtual meeting part of it. And what it did is you would upload some information about you, and it would use some machine learning AI tools, and it would set up a virtual 1-on-3 to 5 person meeting with you, with other people who had shared interests and stuff. So it was trying to simulate the virtual meetings you have in the hall. The virtual meetings you have as you're standing in the back of the room waiting for things to begin and like that. I think you're going to see more of that. But, there's also, even though I miss in-person meetings, the fact that we're going to have digital meetings, even when in-person meetings coming back, I don't think we're going to lose the digital. It has some great other benefits now. I gone to a couple of conferences where they had babysitters and where they had nursing rooms. Most conferences, you exclude that type of demographic where they want to bring their kids or they're nursing and need to do things like that. One of the other things that was interesting to me with the rise of virtual conferences during COVID is the carbon footprint from attending conferences is huge. You look at South by Southwest, the number of airplanes that are increased, the number of Ubers, cabs, rental cars, all of that. It has a tremendous carbon footprint. And some of the studies showing how much that carbon footprint has been reduced blow me away. I mean, totally blow me away. And the fact that with the rise of digital conferencing, even as part of a live event, it's helping make conferences more asynchronous. Because if I go and attend only a live conference, they're always synchronous. And I can tell you as an attendee, I've had to make hard choices going, gee, I want to hear these 3 speakers. They're all at the same time. And the rise of digital, particularly using systems like the End of a Fly and the others and the events, you're going to see more of that because it's structured like a traditional conference with multiple sessions, as opposed to Zoom, where Matt can share the recording here, but it's going to be hard to archive. What these digital platforms that are built as a replacement to or supplement to conferences, that becomes part of the standard operating procedure there, where just like you want to go through the agenda and pick which ones you're going to attend, it also will let you do that on replay. So some of the conferences I've spoken at all around the world for, well over a decade is the Innotech conferences. And what's interesting to me is they always come out about, what, Matt, 4 weeks after the event, with those of us who will upload our slides, or if we had a video, we'll upload the video and things. And I'm amazed at the number of questions I always get 4 weeks, 5 weeks after the conference going, gee, I was going through your slides. I couldn't attend your session, but I have in the past, I wanted to go through your slides. Well, those were afterthoughts because I was presenting live. If I know I'm going to present digital as well as even live, it's going to change for me how I prepare my visuals, how I prepare my presence, and how I work. I'm one of those horrible storytellers who, Matt, I would have a hard time passing some of the new virtual speaker certification things because I'm a rule breaker when it comes to speaking. One of my favorite ways to start a talk in a large room is not on stage. I like to come in the back door at the time it is to start, and I'll start talking to the audience as I'm walking down the aisle. I rarely stand at a podium. I always wear, for a large group, if my voice can't handle it, a wireless mic. And I'll walk the front of the room. I'll walk down and back and forth on the aisle. And, you know, I can't do that digitally. No, they tell you in the certification, never turn your back on the audience. I break that rule too, because it helps me control the perceptions of the room. It helps me tell the stories better. And so those of us like myself or Scott who present often, it's going to make us rethink how we present. And it's going to make it harder, I believe, for us to tell stories. If I'm just presenting an education session, that's one thing. But if I'm presenting a keynote or a very more engaging, like what's the future of data? What's the future of other things? Those are going to become much harder for me to do successfully. Understanding I have both a digital approach as well as a in-person approach in the future. And we're going to have to think, how do we adapt this new technology? How do we do the things that will let us do both of those? If like I'm presenting only virtual, I have my setup. I told Matt earlier the talk I did on cyber to those 4,000 people, I stood up the whole time. I had my camera in front of my light ring and the other lights and did that. But how can I do a light ring on stage if I'm presenting to people in the audience as well as people virtual? Which one gets preference? Or do I do a job that neither group is really satisfied, but both groups get the information? Or how do I do those? So to me, that's part of what Matt talked with me about in this. What are the technology changes? And you're going to see more things like these virtual question asking systems. You're going to see more technology applied for in-person meetings, which is good. These virtual question asking work both in a live session and remote. So that's one of the good things about pulling those together. But, you know, I've done talks over Zoom, over Skype, over Microsoft Teams and others. That's okay if I'm just lecturing to you, talking to you like I am now. But if I'm going to more of a conference setting, I really think you're going to go and see much more of the Attendify, the Event Cloud, and the SOCO become much more the norm, particularly for the large conferences.
David, can I ask another question here?
Sure.
I'm gonna use my friend Dan Summer as an example. So Dan, you're asked to speak on military justice after you retire. What would the questions that Dan would want to ask you in terms of what kind of technology is available, and what would be the most basic things that a person should have for both a virtual and a live audience? What would be the tools that you'd want to have to make sure it works well for both those settings?
To me, there's a couple of things. You know, it used to be when I did most of my Zoom calls, my Skype calls, I was more like one of the Dans, like Don. I always wore my good headsets and my boom microphone. I find speaking, that distracts. So I quit doing that except for small one-on-one conferences. Then I went ahead and bought one of the USB microphones and had that up in front of me. Well, that worked, but I didn't like the presence. I didn't like the feel. And so Matt asked me recently, what would I recommend to him as part of the technology for speaking like this? And I recommended a stand with a circle light and stuff to help with the light. But I also recommended to him, for example, this is a little speaker microphone I use now. And what I really like about it is I can use it one-on-one, or I can use it with a room of up to 15 people to ask questions. But it is also the speaker and the microphone. And the presence doesn't change a lot. I can be close, I can scoot back, and you notice the volume stays pretty consistent because of the type of design of this. One of the things I started doing is more using this Java unit instead of my microphones, instead of my headsets, simply because of how it's designed. And it also gives me the presence cues. And again, I can move this wherever. So if I'm presenting up here, I can actually set it up here underneath the main camera and use it. Or the other thing is if I'm beginning to switch through cameras and go to different cameras like this, or side cameras, or a document camera, as well as my PowerPoints or other things, it just makes it easier for me to navigate like that and connect. Just like if you look at Scott on the screen today, he has his earbuds in. I tried earbuds too. I actually found, to me as an audience member, those earbuds become distracting to me Because I'm going to pick on you, Scott. If you look at Scott on his screen right now, and you go and look at the psychology of the image, the psychology of the colors, my eye goes first to Scott's earbuds before it even goes to his face, because they're the brightest thing on the screen. Well, your head's pretty bright too, Scott, there, but it goes with your beard, so it kind of equals each other out. And so you see those things, but as we get going to answer your question a bit more, Matt, those type of things are going to become more important to the people who are presenting.
Would you recommend doing a trial run if this is the first time you're using the technology before you actually do the presentation?
100%, 100%. And even to that, I mean, I'm at my home in Austin right now, which is a totally different image if I was conferencing out of my office in Frisco, Texas, in the Cowboys headquarters building. You know, I have an atrium there. I have the windows behind me going outside. To my side here, I have actually windows open into my backyard. And so the light I chose on this side is more of a warm daylight light. If I didn't have the windows open, I might have chosen a light more like this, or a light more like this one, than the warmer light like I have now. And you'll begin to do those if you're the speaker too. And I was on a 2-hour conference call this morning with Belarus. I didn't use the circle light on that, but the window lights, those were my prime way I lit myself. And the guys complimented me and going, God, you look so warm. We look so blue. And you see stuff like that. And again, we have to change our mindset as speakers on how we're going to present virtually, how we're going to present when it's a hybrid of virtual and in person. And I might choose 100% different technology to present totally virtually than if I do hybrid. In fact, I know for sure I will.
What do you mean by that? What would be the big difference between virtual and hybrid?
You put even a small group, put 10 people in a room in front of me, put 500 people virtually in the front of me. I'm going to present to the virtual audience. I'm going to probably mostly ignore the in-person audience. Now, give me a split, 200 people in a room, 200 people virtually. I'm going to probably play more to the room than I play to the camera.
Okay.
I'm going to probably worry more about answering questions live in the room than the digital questions that people give to me, either using one of the tools like Slido or in chat or whatever. Some of the tools like Slido is one of my favorite tools though for asking questions, because it has enough intelligence in it. It will group the questions for you. And other people in the audience can look at those and vote on them. It's like one of the conferences where I was an attendee when they were using that. I asked a really hard question and I had like 100 people vote my question. So guess what? That question was asked. And so you're seeing that type of technology too. I think that technology will work equally well remote, all digital, and in a live environment and in the hybrid of it. But things like using the chat function in Zoom to ask questions, you're really locked into just the remote audience. So Matt, that's a quick and dirty answer. That's
a great answer. So I have another question, unless somebody else wants to ask.
I'd like to speak up about something that he said. Is that okay?
Go ahead, Scott.
So church is where, I'm finding an amazing amount of technology value. I attend a mega church. We've been virtually online since, probably April. And when it first started, the pastor got on the stage. It was very cold and wasn't very good. Looked right at the camera. He was trying to figure it out. But over a period of time, he did figure it out. And he got better. They had their praise team up, and he got a lot better at it. And then a friend of mine was talking that he went, they opened their church back up, and he got to go live, and you know, and he said the same thing you did, David. Said, you know, when I went back to the live event and I was with the crowd, it was great, but the pastor preached to the left and preached to the right, and I didn't feel anywhere near the connection that I did when he was on Zoom, because on Zoom, he was always looking right at me.
That's right.
And it was interesting. Now, if you watch somebody like Joel Osteen, who's been doing this on camera for years, you'll notice that though he speaks to the left and the right, he's very conscious of coming into that camera and looking at it, making points. When he's about to make a point, he'll look in that camera and make that point. And the congregation can see it on either side of him in these huge monitors. So I'm learning from that. And I'm learning that I did a presentation a couple of months ago, all virtual. There were up to 1,000 people. And the response I got was, Scott's presentation gave us goosebumps. And that was entirely virtual. So there's some powerful dynamics, I think, that are happening from looking at the camera. When we get back live in front of audiences, I'm going to have to be real conscious to look at that camera while I meet with the audience that's there. And then what you were talking about the questions coming in, I've also discovered that having that moderator, that third person who takes care of all that,
That's right.
and will say, hey, Scott, we have a question on XYZ. Could you answer that?
That's
then
really
I'm not
important.
I'm not having to think through any of that. I found that very important. So I just wanted to make those comments on what you'd already covered, David.
I think you're 100% right. And we're going to see more of that. You know, I've resisted the temptation today to do much more with what I have here. I didn't switch cameras. I didn't zoom my camera in and change the stuff. If I'm doing more of a really live virtual talk, particularly a 45, 50-minute one, I'll do more of that. I'll work the camera. The other thing that the other ones on the screen might notice is between Scott and I, even virtually, we use our hands. And most people who talk on Zoom, you tend to sit on your hands. And you really just think about sitting back and talking. And if you're a good conference presenter, you use your body, you use your hands. It's as important as looking at the camera. And again, those are some of the differences we're going to have to really, as speakers, struggle with when we go back to, like the church did, to live plus virtual. Because you're either going to you're going to prefer one group, or maybe do an okay job of trying to satisfy both. But you're right, Joel Osteen and some of the others have perfected that. But if you look at them, part of what makes them effective, both digitally and live, is he has multiple cameras set up. He actually has camera operators who follow him and stuff too, and someone else making those decisions. One of the pieces of technology I want to buy, and I haven't done it yet, is they are now making little switchers that all your cameras can go into with a remote control that can fit in your hand. I would love that. In my offices in Dallas, I have 85-inch monitors that can also be a touchscreen, and I can write on it. Some of the things I've done up there, I have switched over to that. and written on it while I'm presenting and get that interactive part going more. But again, you have to use the technologies in a way that can connect to those you're presenting with. And it's not going to be the same for everyone. You know, Jim, you might not use a touch screen like I did there, because again, I broke the rules by using the touch screen. I turned my back to the camera. So it's like a school teacher writing on the blackboard. But that was what I wanted to achieve by using the electronic marker board and the camera, is I wanted to deliberately have that type of reset. And we need to understand that there's some of the tricks we used in live rooms, we're going to have to design the same type of tricks as we present digitally too. So yes, there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of software, but a lot of it is how we take our skills and present it live too. You know, it's just like in any organization, the best asset is your human capital asset. We need to think the same thing as the speaker, is how do we connect to the human capital assets at the other end of the camera, at the other end of the electronic systems we're using. I find when I present virtually, I have to be more deliberate in my slides. When I present live, my slides are there as a supportive tool and not necessarily as a primary tool. Where if I were to screen share my slide deck, it becomes a primary tool much more than in a live presentation. So you have to be much more deliberate. The talk I gave on cybersecurity, if I had given that live, I probably would have used 40 slides. Doing it digitally, all virtual, I used 17 slides.
Jim, you have a question?
Go ahead,
I was
Jim.
just going to ask him that, and there was a little bump. I didn't. You went 40 slides live, and how many digitally?
About 17.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you. Whether you, whether it was more or less. You know, I love the fact that you're talking about how you break the rules as a presenter, and I break the rules too. As those who've seen me know, but I'm all over the stage. I go into the audience often.
I do too.
I love doing that, and of course, that's one of the things that you just miss in digital. But so it's trying to find a way to keep that individuality that I prize so much, that makes me different, and still be able to connect digitally. It's
Jim, part of the way I do that is use multiple cameras.
That's right. Most of us don't have. Do most of you all have multiple cameras? Who has multiple cameras? Matt?
3.
And David. Is it super expensive or not?
No.
So I need to be thinking about that.
You know, Jim, you can just get multiple webcams. So I tend to use Logitech because of the controls that I have with that, which I can use Logitech and zoom in, zoom out, do stuff like that on screen. But what we do, even in my conference rooms at my company in Dallas, is we have one camera, which is remote tilt pan zoom, that will follow the presets. But what I've done is I've gone back in there and put a wide area camera above it. I have cameras that I can put on the conference table as well. And I'll do different ones when I present. I always like one here, but I like one off to the side too. And even then, I've been known to let you see me turn. And as I turn, go to the camera that's over there. And again, that's not quite like walking down the aisle in front of them, but it gets you some of that same dynamics too.
Right.
And one of the things that, you know, we've talked a lot about your studio at the National Speakers Association here in Austin. We have a whole division that talks about those kind of things on a bi-weekly basis. But I've got a keynote that's coming up in a first part of February, and I'm going to a studio, and I'm going to let the studio crew take care of all that. And the studio crew is only maybe one, possibly two people. They have 3 cameras, and they have all the lights. They can control my background when I want to change my background to have another setting on a golf course for, sand traps. And I've decided that though I may add another camera or two here in my studio, I'm not going to try to make my home studio a studio that I could go and a conference would pay for the rent on that, so that I could give, a presentation more than what I could do here in my office. So I think it's kind of a flip of a coin, how much I have already invested in cameras and lights and green sheets and all of that. But before I go too deep in it, I'm just going to go to a studio and let them.
Some of the folks, Scott, that I have attended a bunch of their meetings for is, I think you might know him, a couple of you might, is a gentleman in Dallas named Bill Wallace. He runs Success North Dallas. And I've spoken at Success North Dallas several times live in the past. He uses a studio environment now for his speakers. And it does some of the things you talked about. Is you have a person up there handling, here's the questions coming in. You have Bill as a cutaway shot up there who will help during part of the presentation, kind of like what Matt was doing earlier, to kind of keep the flow moving and try to judge. But one of the things that they do on the stage in their studio environment, which I find real interesting, is the wall around the front where the cameras are, they brought in 4 big screen, flat screens. And they have the galleries shown on those screens. So it's behind the cameras. And a really good studio there, because they do another trick I used to do when I was recording video. I'm a my undergraduate degree was radio, television, film, which most people don't know. But one of the tricks you learned back then was the lights that are in front of you, and you'll see this, Scott, in the studio, is you have brighter lights typically than you do in your home studio. And it will cause you to squint some. And one of the ways to get around that squinting is to go and put lights at the back wall of the studio. And light the back wall, which most of the television people go, that's crazy. But to you as a presenter, that's going to make the key light, the fill light, the backlight on you, not as intense. And so you're going to look more natural when you're trying to present to people on the other side of the camera. Since you don't do a 5 and 10 o'clock newscast every night and you're used to the lights. But there's some of the things like that as you go to that studio environment, where even your technology choices in a studio environment are going to be different in the new digital presentation than they were a year ago, 2 years ago. And we just, we need to share stuff and we need to learn from each other. And, Scott, you talked about the national speakers. I've visited that. I've never joined as a member. And the reason I haven't is I find that some of the keynote speakers and things I like best don't follow the rules they want you to there. And that's been one of my challenges in looking at the national speaker thing, is they tend to want you to fit their mold. And I don't.
We have time for one more question, and then Dave, we're going to take a couple minutes just to wrap up a couple administrative notes. So who else has a question? How about you, Dan? I've not heard from you. You got a question?
I don't know that I have a question, but when you're talking about all the InQtel stuff and all, I worked at NGA for 25 years. So,
and I worked at NGA for 15 years.
Yeah, and I'm a IT guy, so I had to host all of that crap.
So remember the NGA Grand Challenges?
Yep.
I wrote that document.
Oh, great.
I did 6 of their strategic plans.
Yeah. Yep. Well, I was the IT project manager on the new campus, if you've heard of that place.
Yeah, yeah, down at Bellevue.
Mm-hmm.
I also worked a lot at the campuses, not the one over the main one, but some of the other undisclosed campuses too, particularly the ones in Langley and the ones over in Herndon.
We put up, I guess, at the new campus, we put up over 400 VTCs all at once. Right. And so that's, you know, all of this bleeding edge technology. When you talk about 4,000 connections over Zoom or whatever you did it over, it's just mind-boggling how much the back room to support all of this is just, it's all coming together and new things are happening. And I, frankly, in some of these virtual conferences, so we used to have these networking events where you'd go to a bar and meet 200 people, right? Yep. I'm an introvert, and I have a hard time working in that kind of environment. I'd meet maybe 3 or 4 people. Some of these things we've been doing in my veteran, we meet like once a month, do almost 250 people, and then they do these small breakout rooms. And man, I'm not going back to the bar setting. I just love it. The breakout rooms are 5 to 7 people, and communication's happening in those little rooms, and I'm meeting all kinds of people that I would have never met in a local meetup.
Yeah. And that's what's so good about some of these new conferences platforms, like the SOCO, which is the one that is, I think, the best of the 3 I named. I was asked to speak at, I love this, the National Neurological Association, all academicians. But what happened is they used algorithms to break them up into small groups and do it offline. And I got to go across 20 rooms after the talk as they were talking and spend a couple of minutes in each room. Wow. And I tell you what, as a virtual experience, that was some of the closest I've been to a live conference experience since the start of COVID. And that was the SOCO one.
David, I think it's so cool that you're bringing all this stuff up, and you talked about, virtual conferences. Well, I'm on the board now for the National NSA Conference, CLC Conference Leadership Committee, and am getting to be able to influence some of the board about how NSA helps presenters. And when they put on our national conference called Influence, it was all virtual, 40 different speakers, and they did an incredible job doing some of what you're talking about right now. And it's really up to us to set the speed for what speaking is going to be like for the next 40 years.
Oh, yes.
So we have some rules, but once you know the rules, it's okay to break them.
Well, I looked at what it took to become a certified digital presenter. I'm sorry, I just couldn't keep laughing.
Yeah.
So I knew I wouldn't do good in that certification test.
Well, you know something, David? I think you kind of done all right without it. I'm kind of betting on you. I think you've got a future.
Thank you. Oh, and Dan, thank you for your service at NGA and NEMA as well. You know, that is one of the agencies that in Westfield are the 2 that are most overlooked when you look at the agencies that have really significant impact behind the scenes.
Sure.
Really thank you for what you did there.
Yeah. Well, what's funny now is that I'm a contractor out at that other site. Mm-hmm. And all the VTCs don't work, so I don't understand it.
Well, when you go, I I've been a couple of times this year and spoke inside the DNI.
Okay.
And guess what? Their VTCs don't work there either.
Well, that's just it. I remember, you know, there was no cost spared at NGA. I mean, obviously they were in the 2005 BRAC law or whatever. So
Right, they're in BRAC, yeah.
Yeah, they had money raining on them. But you know, the VTC stuff really stops the travel. You know, and you get to see who you're working with. I was a supervisor who had employees in St. Louis, and you know, it just it improves the experience with your employees and everything. I mean, your employees don't have to be local.
Well, Dan,
to
I
manage them.
led the roadmap on persistent surveillance across both the intelligence world and DoD.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the best government presenters came actually out of St. Louis.
Sure.
As we did that. And on the stand-up of Fort Bellevue facility, I was on the Raytheon Lockheed Martin team that did a bunch of the pre-work for that.
David and Dan, I'm going to set up a mutual introduction so you guys can continue that conversation another time.
I could tell stories.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. I thought we were coming to tell stories. That was the hook.
Train on the tracks, guys.
I got to go, gang. Thank y'all.
This was terrific. David, thank you so much.
Yeah,
hey, Scott and Jim and everybody, if you have any topics you'd like covered, I do know that on March the 15th, we have one of the top authors on social media, Mark Schaefer. He's scheduled for March the 15th. I'm still looking at February 15th. Have any thoughts, any ideas? Let me know. David, I owe you a margarita. Thank you. And guys, thank you for joining us. If you have any thoughts, send them my way. And if you see part of this in a video transcript, do not be surprised. Thank you and good.
And Scott, let's put a virtual happy hour attached to this next time.